Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, where everyone, based on where everyone is. Thank you so very much for joining this. I'm so excited to be hosting this LinkedIn Live. I'm Daniel Space. I am an HR business partner, primarily within the large tech space. Most of you may know me as my online social media moniker, Dan from HR. So we're here to talk today about the two most underused phrases that we've all heard in the last 2 years of uncharted territories and unprecedented times as we've been navigating business. But I think it has brought up a lot of really interesting conversations between business leaders and HR professionals alike about how to evolve and what the introduction of this remote workspace looked like. So I'm super, super excited to be hosting this live. Thank you so much to Gusto, who's one of my absolute favorite HR management companies. And joining me are Liz and Michael, who I would love to just hand over to them to give a brief introduction before we start. Liz?
All right. Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Wilkie. I am the head of the quote-unquote Gustonomics team. But all I do is I take the data off the platform, the Gusto platform that serves 300,000 small businesses. I turn that into economic insights with the help of my team. And we also do some original research on the issues that our small businesses are facing today, like remote and hybrid work, which we're going to talk about.
And hey, everybody, I'm Michael. I'm CEO and co-founder of Reconciled, and we're an online accounting firm for small businesses. We started out hybrid back in 2016 and shifted to fully remote shortly thereafter. And so we've been building this completely remote company ever since. And I'm happy to be part of this discussion and talk about our experience building Reconciled as a completely remote company.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for joining. I want to encourage everyone who's watching, please go ahead and drop questions in the chat, and we'll be addressing as many as we can towards the end. Also, just a quick shout out to the data that we're driving. If you want to read it or have access to it, check the link in the comment sections because there's a lot of that provided. Liz, I'm going to ask you to start off, but before you do, I'm going to say, and I've normally joked around with this, I have been an HR business partner, fortunate enough to work with data and analytic work groups. If I ever had to do a reset in my career, it would be for what you do, because I find it so incredible and so amazing. And when companies utilize data and analytics to enhance their HR, I think it's nothing but amazing. So quick shout out to everyone in your role and everything that you do. But why don't you give us some start offs about what are the things that you've been researching? What have you been discovering about remote work versus SMBs?
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. And I will say, I also think I have a very cool job. So shout out to all the other people who get the privilege of using data analytics in this space, because like work is just so important about what we do and for business success. So anyway, we did this bit of research because we were really seeing a lot of like, should we or shouldn't we have remote work or hybrid work, or is it good or is it not good? And what we heard from all of you small business owners and people who are actually living this is like, that's not really our conversation. Like, we're doing it or we're not doing it, but we need to know how to do it, right? And we have access to all these small businesses, and we just decided to ask them, right? How are you doing? How is it going? What kind of habits do you have, right, that really make remote and hybrid work, right? In order to give some insights to small businesses, to all you guys about how to really do this. And I think 3 things really came through and clear. One is what I love to call choice and voice. So if you're gonna have a remote and hybrid team, make sure that you sort of lean in to the ability to give your workers choice to the extent possible over when they work, where they work, why they work, the conditions under which, right, they get things done. And if you can't give them choice, say you're like, we need to come into the office 1 or 2 days a week, give them voice, all right, about how to do that, right? Give them an opportunity to have input into that. And that just really differentiates businesses that say, this isn't maybe going so well for us, or it's fine, from businesses that really say, we are crushing, we're retaining people, we're getting performance out of them, and it's really working. The second one is clear goals and measurement and check-in against those, right? So measurable goals for your remote and hybrid employees who are working off-site, and then regular check-ins against those goals with managers is like the way to get consistent, sustained engagement and performance out of them. And then last, which sort of seems obvious in hindsight, but I think we'll talk about a lot, and I think Michael's got some great experience here, is intentional connection building, right? So you lose a lot of that in-person connection when you're remote and hybrid, but remote and hybrid companies that have really excelled at sort of maximizing the positives and minimizing the negatives have been able to take time and build connections intentionally in little ways and big ways. And we'll get a little more into that. But those I think are the three main takeaways from all of this work.
So thank you very much for sharing. And I have to agree, one of the most fascinating elements when I was consulting, I felt very fortunate to not be an HR business partner associated with any company because the amount of HR burnout I saw of HR professionals trying to deal with this. So I got a little bit of distance as a consultant. But in the 12 or 13 companies that I consulted with, I consistently saw that any company that actively worked with its employees and heard what they wanted to do and said, we can't do full remote because, this is a chemistry lab and there's chemicals that we're actually working with, but what makes sense for you? What can we agree to? Led to the most outcomes. Yeah. So I guess on that, and especially as it relates to the flexibility and where they work and the hours, Michael, I would love to see how you've been applying it and what's been working for you.
Yeah. What's been really great on all the 3 points I agree with, but especially with remote work, we got to think about what are most of us used to in regards to the work environment. Most of us historically have been used to in-office environments, and that's still the most of the workforce today, even post pandemic is in-office environment. So what all happens in in-office environment? You walk into the office, you say hi to the front office receptionist, or you say hi to the front desk person. You walk by a few other offices or cubes, you say hi, you ask people how their weekends were, you pop in for a quick question, you're getting coffee together, you go on a 15-minute walk and go grab Starbucks. Whatever those things are, those all happen, and they generally tend to happen unintentionally and spontaneously. Well, all that goes away in remote work and in most hybrid work situations now. The employees that are hybrid and working from home, or all the employees working from home and remotely, they've had that environment gone, and everything that's natural to them is at home now. So that natural ability to walk into an office, say hi is gone, or walking by a random office and to say hi is gone. So as an employer, as Reconciled, we've had to think about how do we create that intentional spontaneity? How do we recreate those environments so that that shift of being able to connect with people is still there? And it's not just enough to spin up a Slack instance or a Microsoft Teams instance. You have to actually plan it out intentionally to recreate those moments for people, because now instead of much of their day being able to spontaneously be either interrupted or to have intentional connection, they're most of their week alone in a room in front of a blue screen. So that connection is gone, and you have to really recreate that. And that's where we really see success, and also the ability for our employees to not burn out either, just from pure loneliness or not feeling like they're connected with the company anymore because no one's connecting with them. We want to really engage them, and that's what we've been able to do at Reconciled.
And I think something like that is so fantastic, especially because it really sounds like you're taking them and taking because I think there's a lot of negative stigma from people that are like the forcing the return to work. But there are really important elements to everything that you decide. From my own personal anecdote, I had joined a company as a consultant, and it was the first month I realized I'd left my house in 4 months. And so the anxiety I had for going to the office was huge. When I got to the office and spent a day with everyone, I was like, I actually missed this. This was nice, like to be able to like walk in hallways and talk to people and whatnot. So before we continue, by the way, this is just a very, very huge thing with me. A very huge congratulations to you, Katie, because it sounds like you're joining Gusto, and I wish you nothing but the best of luck in your interviews, Gergana. So as someone who's very familiar with job search, I just wanted to say a quick shout out to both of that. So now, as it relates to the resistance, why are you finding business owners to be so resistant to either full remote or full hybrid, especially as we're seeing companies that were one of the first adopters of saying, we are full remote, no worries. And they're now they're like, oh, you know what? I think we're going to go ahead and go back to full office.
Yeah, I think a big piece. Yeah, I think a big piece of this is, and then we'll let Liz chime in because I'm sure she has a lot of research and study on this. Is if you think about the reason why most individuals went to remote work or hybrid during the pandemic, it was a reaction to medical and state mandates that were happening. And it wasn't an intentional strategy as part of their long-term strategic growth plan or building culture scenario. It was really a matter of, hey, we have to do this. We don't really want to do this, and we have to. And so I'm frankly not surprised, because at the end of the day, unless those companies then shifted their strategies to be long-term hybrid or remote, it really is not in the best interest of their business to stay that way, when all of their strategic initiatives and all their growth plans are centered around building physical infrastructure, growing, office environments or manufacturing environments, and making capital investments, and also, a lot of the fundraising or a lot of the commitments they've made to third parties may be centered around some of those capital investments as well. So unless a company greatly shifts that, if it was purely a reactionary decision, then I'm not surprised now to see so many companies pull back on that decision, because frankly, so many, because of the growth and run up of a pre-pandemic of companies in the economy, made huge capital investments that they now need to leverage and use, and subleasing space or giving up is not the best option in their strategic plan.
Yeah, I mean, I would add sort of onto that, Michael, as like an economist view, we think about culture as like a technology of production, right? It's about how people engage to build, right? All the stuff, services or products that they're going to build. And I think what's been really difficult for companies switching to remote and hybrid is that culture is very difficult to build and it's very difficult to change. But the culture that you have to start to build to do remote and hybrid really successfully is different, right? And it really takes intention. And I think that it's a huge challenge. And so I think for lots of companies, it's been easier to say, we'll go back to the thing we're doing, right? Or we'll move it just a little bit, right? And I think that companies have maybe thought that it's not possible for them to build a remote or hybrid culture. But I mean, I think the businesses that we surveyed say, you really can do it. It's not like super secret. There's no technology fix. Like, it's a really human fix. And then I think what's really interesting is that new companies born after the pandemic are way more likely to be fully remote or fully hybrid from the beginning. They're actually way more likely to be fully remote, and they don't have the baggage, right, that like pre-pandemic companies tend to have. I mean, your company, Michael, accepted, since you sort of made the decision to go fully remote before the pandemic. But I mean, I think that's sort of it for me when I look into this data and I see that.
Wanting to and have enjoyed that flexibility. There are concerns about want to get realize that they're not to where they don't want to go back, and now they're let's go back to as it relates to how you describe
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things, and I'll just sort of repeat the question since you were breaking up, but you're sort of specifically asking about like one-on-ones and check-ins with managers and how that relates to goals and check-ins for performance. So there's sort of two parts of that. One is the one-on-ones with managers, right? And what we sort of find is that remote and hybrid companies tend to have much more frequent one-to-one check-ins with managers, right? So, whereas if you were in office, you might have a formal one-to-one check-in with your manager, maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month, right? If I remember from my pre-in office days. remote and hybrid companies that really excel and say that they are managing performance and they're managing retention and they're managing burnout really well, they are much more likely to have multiple meetings a week, or at least one meeting a week, one-on-ones with managers. So I will say the time for managers to invest in order to get those benefits is much higher, right? And so you really need to think about that when you're planning. But what that does is it gives a lot of opportunity to coach, to level set, right, what you're doing, to maybe course correct a little bit, any of those things. And that's so important because, as Michael said, there's so much time in the workday that your remote and hybrid employees have to make decisions for themselves, right, about how to pursue the business goal. And those check-ins are really important for level setting and making sure everybody's on the right track. And then the first part of that is clear, measurable goals, right? Because they're making all these decisions, they have to be really autonomous and really self-directed. So they have to know where they're going, right? They have to know, where the goal is that they're headed for. And so they don't have to wait for somebody to specify that for them or to clarify that for them. Like, the clearer you can set your goals and help employees who are remote and hybrid understand, like, this is where we're going. Anything you need to do, whenever you need to do it to get there, like, that's where we're headed. And then regular check-ins to sort of make sure that that's on track. Like, those two things are successful in getting remote and hybrid employees really high performing and really on track, even when they're operating on their own time.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing this same thing reconciled is the amount of effort you have to put in to engage and make sure that everyone's on track and engage and do check-ins with their employees is extremely critical. And that's done sometimes daily, if not at least weekly, with one-on-ones as well as group meetings in their interdepartment or in your department. We have this thing I love to say at Reconciled is over communication in a in-office environment is regular communication in a hybrid remote environment. And the reason is because the advantage you have in an in-office is that you could get everyone together physically in an office and go, here's the official announcement, here's the official word from the top, right? And you could say that in front of everybody live. Well, in a remote environment, that's not always the case. And you're often using multiple communications tools in order to get your message out. So over communicating, what will feel like over communicating in an online remote environment is actually the standard that you need to take in order to keep everyone engaged on the same page throughout the day. And also, to make sure that on that week, the company's mission is being met. It also then allows you to have the flexibility, which is what we found in the research, right? Liz found employees then have the flexibility to work when and how they work in the hybrid or remote environment. So if over communication is happening, they can see that communication and align the work they're doing in the different time zones they're in or from the different locations they're in order to accomplish and align themselves with that mission. So that those check-ins are really, really key. And the check-ins also don't have to all be, and they shouldn't always just be formal. They should also be very informal, right? So we noticed starting off with what we would call small talk or niceties, right? Really engaging and saying, how are you doing? Do you feel prepared mentally for this meeting we're having? Do we need to just take 5 seconds or 10 seconds and just, prep ourselves and prep our thoughts? You might have just come out of another meeting, just helping each other prepare to show up as your best self for the meeting. So there's a lot of things you have to do intentionally in these check-ins for hybrid and remote, but they do lead to more successful engagement in that environment.
So apologies before, I know my stream was a little bit choppy. I just moved in, so I didn't want everyone to see a bunch of boxes to the side. So hopefully I now sound better. And so even though we took a reduction as relates to my graphics. So thank you both very much, because I find that so important. Especially Michael, just circling back on that, what I found is that a lot of people are telling managers you have to have more frequent one-on-ones. But much to your point, it has to be a different quality of one-on-one. And it can't just be, how's your mental health? Are you okay? Great. And what I actually started to tell a lot of managers and working with directors especially was that managers were getting some of the biggest burnout ever, because not only did they have to still report up to the directors, they now had to manage a team. And now they were managing a team's fear and low engagement and trying to deal with all of their team's mental health while also having their own families and whatnot. So I think just making sure that the intentional checkups are more of just how's your mental health versus just kind of like a restatement of it seems like you're being a little bit disengaged recently. I know this is really tough. Do you feel like you have enough time? Is there some work that I can help reprioritize? And really make sure that you're building a safe platform to communicate that is so essential. So I'm glad that you're essentially doing that at Reconciled. All right. So for the next question, what I wanted to do was talk about what does the research show as it relates to the key daily habit that businesses need to do as it relates to documenting key information and processes? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, the things that businesses, and this is along the lines of like clear goals, right? So you need goals sort of at every level. And what is most successful or what most important to document is one, company policies. What's the PTO policy? What's the healthcare policy? You know, just so everybody can find it and you don't have to search around on Slack for Dan from HR to tell you what the thing is. It takes time and it's very like it just sort of adds to the mental work of actually, but you're not even doing the work, right? You're just sort of looking for information that's like in and around your job. So company policies really rated very highly. And you wouldn't think that because, you know, they sort of seem like the stuff in the background, but in a remote or hybrid environment, you know, it really makes a difference, right? To have even just this basic level of documentation. And then what really makes a difference is like company level goals, right? Hey, this is where the company is going, right? Not just where your team is going or where you are going, but this is where the company is going because stuff comes up. Businesses need to be agile, right? And sometimes you need to shift, right? And you also want people to be thinking about how does my work ladder up, right, to company success. And when you have company goals really clearly defined, it really helps to connect, right, the work that individuals are doing. And having that sort of front and center and repeated over and over seems to be especially helpful for remote and hybrid workers. I don't want to say that's not helpful for in-person workers too. I definitely have worked in environments where I could have used like a little more specificity about like where we were going and what we were doing. But remote and hybrid companies in particular, just having these in sort of, to Michael's point, in multiple channels, in multiple ways, right? Because there's also a lot more communication, right? So really consistently giving the most important documentation and information, like just sort of helps to keep it steady. And then the last thing, and it's going to seem so silly, but a lot of companies sort of fall short, is project documentation, right? If I'm on a new project or I'm on a project that I've been doing, I own a piece of that, but I don't necessarily have the whole view. But I might need to sort of come up out of my own work and know how all the trains are running and where everything is going. When you are in office, you can just go down the hall and be like, hey, what's the status on this thing? And even if you are, you know, just sending a Slack message, you may not get a response from that person, right, for 20 minutes or 2 hours or 2 days, right, depending on what their situation is. And so project documentation really eliminates the need to depend on people for that specific information. So you can just sort of churn along, right, and get things done and make forward progress. So those three things sort of in that order really differentiate companies that said, we're doing a great job with engagement. We're doing a great job with retention. We're doing a great job with performance.
Yeah, we found documentation to be really key, and especially key in remote environments where there's a lot of tasks that are involved, and the tasks are consistent and repeatable, right? And so the key for scaling in a remote environment is, do you have documentation on how people ought to do the work and what are the standardized ways to do that work? Having it, and as Liz has described, having it in a centralized and easy place to find it so that anybody stepping in can take over, especially when you have roles that are shared or across the organization, you have similar roles, and it allows people to take leave, go out sick. And what a lot of employers dealt with during the pandemic, the Great Resignation, a lot of turnover happening, a lot of tribal knowledge that could be lost that should have been documented. The advantage in-person has with tribal knowledge is that, as Liz said, you can go by the office and ask the person that's been there for longer than you, hey, first of all, how do I use this coffee machine again? Or what does the CEO like being talked to in the morning better or in the evening better? You know, what works? But in a remote environment, all that's gone. You don't have that ability. So documentation is key. And then the other thing that Liz mentioned, I want to kind of further expand is, if you think about the in-office environments many of us are used to, it might be filled with branding or a branded environment that aligns with the company's logo, values, information, and the important things like, mission, vision, values. Well, now everyone's at home. They've got a room with maybe empty walls or all the art or sports teams or whatever it is. So think about the environment they're in and how, whether or not it's actually reinforcing the same message you want to reinforce. So what we do at Reconciled is we send regularly, once or twice a year, a care box to our team members, and it has swag, right? It has shirts, mugs, cups, magnets, stickers, things they can put around their office and they can literally wear. It says, one, we acknowledge we're a part of your life now. We're literally in your home. And secondly, we acknowledge that you're part of this bigger vision, this bigger company, and we want you to be reminded of that on a regular basis. And the room you're in might not be set up properly to do that. So those are all intentional decisions you have to make, not only in documentation internally, but then literally documentation in the environment that our employees are working in.
I think that's really fantastic. So thank you both. So I guess for our last question, why don't we go into one of my favorite topics ever? And so companies as a whole, even live, did this terribly as it relates to what I would call reward, recognition, and celebration. And to me, there's a very huge difference between that. And I had the privilege of working with engineers at Spotify who are the most brilliant people, but refuse to celebrate themselves because their mindset is, but how could I have done that better? Yeah, I know I just did a whole bunch of code, and I know I just got us $1 million, but if I had done it this way, it would have been like 3% different. And so trying to build cultures, not of recognition, of sending out, hey, thanks so much, Jack, for all your work. That was really great. But rather really just taking the time to meaningfully celebrate someone, to meaningfully reward and recognize the team. And of course, I'm always fighting with executives saying, hey, by the way, the best way to reward and recognize is with money, not with like a day off or like a dinner certificate. But so those things were difficult enough in full work environment. Liz, I'd be curious to know, as it relates to, as we move to hybrid or remote work, what is your data showing about the importance of reward and recognition, and how do we best really kind of amplify that in remote settings?
Yeah, I mean, our data is unambiguous. You small businesses out there, you told us that are really doing hybrid and remote well, you were like, it's the little things, a lot of them, right? Just like what Michael said earlier, is taking deliberate time in every single meeting to share something about yourself and to get something from another person, right? To build a connection as people, because to your point, Dan, our work and our lives are all sort of meshed together, right, in that environment. And you can't create that separation that you might have been able to do in an in-person environment. So really just saying, hey, and also then using the time to show appreciation. I thought you did that really well. I really like what you did here. Thank you so much for doing this extra bit. I will also say, I, again, don't think this is specific to remote and hybrid companies, right? I think that level of human appreciation building and connection building is really important across the board. People really want to feel sort of recognized and connected. We didn't specifically ask about comp, but what we found, and I can't sort of stress enough that the impact of that, of small celebrations, right? Sending birthday cards, sending small gifts of appreciation. And I know, Dan, you have some opinions about this, are almost as valuable in terms of moving a company from average performance to far above average performance in terms of remote and hybrid culture as a big offsite, regular time, like a number of times a year. Those are also important. It's sort of the big and the small. But a big offsite, most remote and hybrid companies did have like a big offsite, like every quarter or less, right? It's actually not as often as you would think it is. Most companies did once a year or twice a year. A few did a quarter, like every quarter. But when you combine that with the small day-to-day things, that's where remote and hybrid companies like really, really shine in terms of being able to get alignment and engagement and performance out of people who are doing remote and hybrid. It's sort of like the two of them together are way stronger. And the impact of those little things is just as big. And by the way, far less expensive than the impact of that big thing.
I totally agree. And what about Michael? I'm curious to hear what you've been doing at Reconcile to make sure that you're spending time to reward and recognize your employees.
Yeah, there's a few things, which is when all that Liz said is great. One is we make it a regular practice to recognize birthdays and work anniversaries. That's really, really, really key. And then if there's anything major that we feel like is appropriate on sharing with the whole company, like the birth of a child, a marriage, unfortunately, sometimes a death in the family or a loved one, a pet that dies, right? Those are all stories we share. We want to both say to the employee, we want to celebrate with you on life's great moments, and we want to agree with you on those hard times, knowing that because you're home, it's going to actually be harder for you to have to deal with emotionally what you're going through, instead of leaving the home and coming into the office, right? You're sitting at home already grieving that thing. So we want to show employees that we're going to do both with you. And I've seen this at a lot of other remote companies as well as ours, is we have a water cooler channel, where really it's a time for people to share what's happening in life, whether it's pictures of their family. Right now, all the pictures are of summer vacations and summer travel, weekend trips. I just went camping this past weekend with my son, was able to show pictures of that. But it allows each of us to kind of jump into each other's life. And then the other thing we encourage our employees to do is share the real aspects of their life that generally isn't shared at work, right? So if they're really involved in their kids' PTO or PTA, if they're really involved in their faith community, right? Or if they're involved in their neighborhood events planning, whatever it is, we want to know, because that's a part of their life that is really important to them. And often they can do that because they're now working remotely or hybrid. They've removed the commute to work or to an office. Now they're reinvesting that time into their community or into their family. So we want to share and celebrate in that as well. We do get our team together, at least the leadership team, twice a year. And we've been trying to get the whole company together once a year. So, and as Liz says, that's a huge cost when you're all over the country or the world and trying to fly those people in. So different companies do it differently. But one thing we do find is having that mix, and especially that occasional connection time in person. Those in-person times become way more valuable now, because you've worked with these employees remotely for so many months or weeks or years. You finally get to meet them, and it's like you're meeting somebody you've known for years, but you've never physically seen them, right? So it's just a really cool connection. It makes it deeper and meaningful. So there really is no one answer to this. It's a mix of everything, but the little things are super important. One of the things I had to learn as a small business CEO is the power of my recognition was really, really impactful. And it was hard for me to understand that, because I don't try to take myself too seriously. I don't hold myself on this pedestal as this big CEO. But for me to say a positive word about just a little thing about anybody at the company was greatly, greatly more powerful than money most of the time. It was really powerful. And so I had to accept that. And I think for you CEOs out there and business owners out there, the power of your words on the day of your employee or the week of your employee, don't take that for granted. It is really, really powerful. And you can use that to the advantage of getting everybody aligned with you, but also to really change how they feel about that day or week at their workplace.
So before we turned over to Q&A, my own thoughts on this was I cannot stress that enough, especially from the CEO, Michael. I've dealt with enough C-level suite employees that are like, wait, do they really care? I'm like, you have no idea how meaningful you saying, hey, that marketing thing that just happened, I heard back from that. Like, he's very pleased with that. So hats out for you 3 employees. The other thing I found that was so incredibly touching was that when I had worked for a music streaming company, there was one of our product testing engineers was doing music on the side, and she had launched her album over a weekend. And so the 2 SVPs of engineering and product put the link in and said, so-and-so who's like this QA analyst who's been here for 2 years has been absolutely killing it. Check out her song. And she told me later that she was actually just about to resign. She had gotten 2 other offers and was considering it. That made her stay, because she was like, I didn't even know that they thought about that. I didn't know they knew me. The fact that they said that it wasn't considered like, hey, what are you doing off hours? Like, that meant really all the difference. All right. Thank you both so very much. This has been absolutely incredible. Now we want to turn it over to the audience. We know we got some questions. I guess with what's your large view on large companies revamping their traditional office space in order to make hybrid remote work efficiency? From Jack Lau. Would you like to go first, Liz?
Yeah, I mean, I will say this is more from anecdotal evidence because we didn't really ask companies in our survey about their physical spaces. But what I've sort of heard over and over again is that companies are really rethinking what is going into the office for, right? Absent the situation where you're on a production floor or, you're in a chem lab or whatever, right? Then work is for the production of things. But a lot of companies are rethinking what part of work should be done in the office. And for many companies, that's about in-person meetings, right, with larger groups. So we did actually ask about meetings. Most people believe that meetings with 2 to 3 people total are way more effective on Zoom, actually, that being in person just sort of gets in the way of everything. But those sort of mid-size meetings between like 4 and 10 people, where there's a lot of interaction going on and there's a lot of things being sort of discussed and thrown around, in office time is actually really valuable if you're a hybrid company for doing that sort of thing, right? And then also that connection building. So a lot of companies have thought sort of intentionally about how do we construct the day such that everybody comes and we go to lunch, right? And that's team building time, where everybody comes and we do this project design meeting, right? And that's sort of the point that you're really thinking about what's the real benefit of being together in person and how do we maximize that time so that all the rest of the time, all the other work can get done.
Will, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the thing to avoid, the thing to avoid with revamping environments, large office environments, is if you were walking through that large office now, when on the days people come in and everyone's still on a computer doing a Zoom meeting or a video meeting, it's probably a waste of time, right? An opportunity to leverage that in-person environment. So there might be other creative things you can leverage with that office for. One is, how can it be a revenue producing center, right? Are there opportunities to create a cool co-working space that maybe your clients or your vendors or your partners can also utilize and share with you? Is it a time for you to actually use it to invite your customers in to meet with you and to meet with your team members? Is it a place where small teams can do their own little retreats or conferences that they want to put on at your company if you're at a larger office? And for those of you with this much smaller office, much smaller company, where you need to keep that small office for a variety of reasons, just thinking about the other unique ways you can leverage it, that would actually bring life to your company and bring life to that space. And again, to avoid trying to utilize this space and the employees realizing, wow, we come to the office, yet we're on Zoom meetings all day. Why are we here? And I've heard that many, many times over and over again of why come into the office. And so really leverage that time. And probably the most important thing is, if you're going to make a call like that for in office, the C levels and the CEO better be there, because that sends a very big message that if everyone's required to come in and the C levels don't, then they're really making rules that aren't that important. And they're just to meet some quota or some goal or some compliance issue going on. So there needs to be a leadership by example in those rules as well.
All right, so before we move on to the last question, just really quick for my panel, on a scale from 1 to 10, and everyone in the chat, please go ahead and rate. 1 meaning this is in no way reality, and 10 meaning this is absolutely a fact. What are your thoughts on the real estate being a conspiracy, that the people that own all of these real estate companies have so much sway that they're demanding that CEOs return office so they don't lose all their capital on real estate? I'm going with 3, but Liz, Michael, what are yours? And chat, please also weigh in. 1 meaning this is no way true. 10 meaning yes, tinfoil hat and everything. That is exactly what's happening.
I don't know. I'd probably put it at a 3 too, Dan. I mean, I think that these are powerful, right? Powerful companies with sway. I also think that, lots of these big companies are locked into 10-year leases anyway, right? And many of them are sort of like full delivery. So a lot of these real estate companies are getting paid whether or not the offices sit empty. They just need to worry about when the lease turns over, right? Whether or not they'll re-up.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think there is a reality and pressure around the banking system in commercial loans, but that probably is a very different impact on the reality of whether a company decides, do they bring employees back in or not. And so, I mean, I don't think it has a huge amount of sway. So yeah, with 3 or 4 would be about the same as me.
Okay, that seems to be all right. That seems to be about the comment in the chat as well. All right, so Priyal, I think your last question. Do you have any tips on setting those measurable goals with your employees? Sometimes employees aren't able to speak up about challenges they encounter at work in a remote world, while companies and employees are trying their best. Any tips would be great. My own real quick response is creating a platform where you can talk about these things in a very non-threatening format, where a lot of people are very afraid to say, I'm afraid to admit to you, manager, that I'm not doing well. So I think saying this is really tough, this is really hard, you seem to be disengaged a little bit. What is one thing that we can agree on that you can do this week to kind of like help measure some sort of goal? And it doesn't have to be turn in 10 reports, but it could be attend 2 meetings with your camera on to show that you're engaged. It could be you, employee, reaching out to 2 employees and asking how they're doing. That would be fun. But Liz,
yeah, I mean, I think the sort of measurable and clear is sort of the really important part of that, right? So, you know, not just at the team level, but even at the employee level from like a development perspective, but also from a performance perspective. It's one thing to say, you know, I want you to complete this project, right? That leaves a lot of room open for how, delivery, whether or not, you know, people are sort of doing a little bit extra or thinking creatively or feel empowered to do sort of more. And it's another thing to say, let's talk about what it would look like for you to crush this project, right? And I think there's a co-creation that employees are really responding to from managers that are able to do it, because it also makes it feel more like a team sport or a team effort. And again, this is anecdotal, but I've heard time and time again that managers tend to get really great performance out of employees when they feel like managers are sort of in their corner or on their team, right? We're sort of doing this together. I'm supporting you, but you are also sort of co-creating this process. And it's sort of the mark of a very good manager who can create that sort of team environment. And we've sort of heard that anecdotally, and we've definitely also heard or sort of seen that empirically when we ask people about it.
Yeah, I really do believe it starts at the culture level of for anyone who has, you know, direct reports. Do your direct reports absolutely believe you want them to succeed, right? Do they believe you exist as a manager to help them and want them to succeed? And so there's probably 2 questions that anybody can ask. You can ask a coworker. You can even ask your own manager. You can ask a direct report. One is, what is the biggest challenge you're facing today or this week that you need to accomplish? What's the biggest one? And it could be personal, professional. It could be my son is having a hard time this week, and it's really impacting my mental capacity this week. So I just want you to be thinking about that. And then the second question can be, what can I do? What's the one thing I could do today or this week to help you succeed today or this week? And just those 2 questions can really build that trust and that safe environment that people feel that, hey, you're really for me. The fact that you're asking those 2 questions tells me you're really for me. I feel safe now to tell you that, hey, I'm struggling, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I have what I feel like is a dumb question, but can I ask you?
Mm-hmm.
Time and time again, just changing the way you ask it and the questions you do ask really change that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I know we're just at about time, so I wanted to thank Liz, thank you both. Michael, as it relates to finding me, again, my biggest spot is TikTok on Dan, on Instagram and Twitter, where I do a mixture of actually providing real meaningful advice, but also with a lot of sarcastic humor, especially debunking charlatans and bad advice givers. You're also free to add me on LinkedIn. Liz, Michael, where can we find you? And Liz, especially, where can we find your research?
There is, I believe, a link in the comments to go directly to this research. You can get all the numbers. You can see all the results. It's in a beautiful ebook format, and I couldn't be prouder of it. I personally am pretty active on LinkedIn. I am not at all active on Twitter or TikTok. I have like 3 Twitter followers, and one of them is my dead grandma. So don't find me there. Definitely look for me on LinkedIn.
I didn't mean to laugh that your grandma's dead, Liz, but I found it funny. That's a funny comment. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. When you look Michael Lee, you'll see a little fire emoji in the front of the name. It's not because I believe I'm fire. It's just to understand when people reach out to me for spam. So the fire emoji is right there, Michael Lee. And then also I'm on Twitter as well. So I'm active on both.
Great. Thank you all very much. back, our LinkedIn's would be covered through our last names. For Michael, to let you know, as I was trying to tag him, do look for the fire emoji. That makes all the difference. But if for example, if you look for Daniel Space, I posted this morning, which has Liz and Michael's full names, so that you can find them both on LinkedIn. A big, huge shout for Gusto. In my 2.5 years of consulting, I have never, ever, ever pushed an HR management consulting an HR management software company like Gusto. If you're a small business, medium-sized business looking for one of the best HR intuitive things that basically do everything, I cannot recommend Gusto enough. But thank you all so much for coming and spending time with us today, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day.